The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold, e mihi ne, ko Duncan Grieve, tōku ingoa. My guest today is Willie Jackson, who is an MP and a minister, and the Minister for Broadcasting and Media. He's also someone with a decades-long, multi-dimensional career within the media. He's played he sort of started out in the music industry and played like quite a critical role at Tangata Records, one of the most important labels in Māori music history, particularly in terms of making it kind of a sort of a pop, building a bridge to pop with it. And we talk a bit about that and his career in radio and in television. And he really, he came up through that period where, he had to sort of fight for Māori voices and representation within mainstream platforms, while also building out infrastructure for sort of Māori-controlled media as well. Very, very impressive career in that respect. But one of the things that, I really like about him as a figure in our sort of media history is that he's very much a product of that era where you sort of got in a room and debated things. And, and he sort of talks about that on the pod, and we talked about it before and after too. And, there are plenty of people, he makes reference to this, who are sort of ideologically quite different to this, who, if you look at his politics, his two different terms in Parliament, he's very much a man of the left, a union man. But he's very comfortable kind of debating with people from different sides of the aisle, and that's I think that as a broadcasting minister, the fact that he has that ability to find common ground with people with different perspectives is actually a really important thing at that role, particularly at this very specific moment in time when the government is merging RNZ with TVNZ and bulking that thing out into a new entity, which is currently called Aotearoa New Zealand Public Media. I am certain that will change. It must, essentially, because no one wants to be talking about NZPM. So we talk a bit about his career, and then we get into all of the knotty issues confronting the sector at the time. We talk obviously about the merger and particularly about how it will relate to both the private sector media and the sort of media that serves particular communities, Māori, Pacific, Pan-Asian communities, all of the different pieces that have the potential to be either smothered or elevated by this, depending on how it's wired. We also talk about the Public Interest Journalism Fund and what he has publicly stated thinks should replace it, which is deals between the technology companies and the New Zealand news media. That process feels pretty interminably stalled at the moment, but he seems to be bringing a jolt of energy to it, and there's quite a substantial discussion about that in there. Look, it's an hour-long podcast, but if you work in this industry, should say we talk about New Zealand on air, its future, how it's impacted by this. There's just a bunch going on in here, and what I liked about him, he's not shy about expressing an opinion about laying down a timeline and an expectation. It's just, Chris Farfoy was much more in the mould of that sort of cautious, relatively safe style of minister. Willie is a whole different thing, and it's a really enjoyable chat. So please enjoy Willie Jackson on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Willie.
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
Welcome to the fold. It's so good to have you on here. I wondered if obviously we're going to talk about ANZ-PM, very catchy name, Future of New Zealand on Air, a whole bunch of things. But before we do that, I actually want to kind of go through a bit of your career because I don't think we've had a broadcasting minister who's had such a kind of varied career within the media before taking that role. And the place I want to start is with Tangata Records and time managing Moana, and that was a real generation of kind of strong Māori musicians, kind of entering into a pop cultural realm. And just share your memories of that time.
Oh, well, Tangata Records came about after I had been managing Moana between 86 and about 90. I managed it right till we got divorced, actually. But then I stopped managing it. But
interesting, right?
Yeah. So I'd been managing one, and then there were other artists around, that we were looking at. We had Hinewehi Mohi, you had Emma Paki, you had South Side of Bombay. And so I had a good mate guy called Neil Cruikshank who had this idea of tangata and putting it together. And then we had this cool dude in town called Tim Moon. I don't know if you know Tim Moon, but he was like the sharpshooter around. He's a good guy, Tim, a real businessman. And so we put together the Tangata Record idea, and it sort of took off. It became the sort of biggest Māori label of probably of that generation. After Maui, I don't know if you remember Maui, that was Dalvanius's setup. And Dal was a very close friend to me because I helped him. He helped me in terms of managing Moana's career early on because he was the guy who knew everything, and he did Poie and so it was off the back of that, and it was just a humbling time to be able to bring Māori artists together. And we had Moana, we had Emma Paki, until Neil Finn and them stole her off us.
No hard feelings.
No, Neil came to apologise too, might I add. But, that's what happened in those days. We had South Side of Bombay. Hinewehi went off with a guy called Jazz Coleman. I don't know if you remember
From
Jazz.
Killing Joke, who moved over to Barrier.
That's right. And so it was a real neat time. And I suppose the highlight for us was when we did the Once Were Warriors album, because we were putting out songs like What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, and selling a couple of hundred records, or units, a couple of hundred units, and we put that out a couple of years beforehand. But once Were Warriors ran, and
was that go to number one around then?
What's the Time, Mr. Wolf? I don't know if it went to number one, but it went top 10. It went top 10, and everybody, you put out a movie where all the Maoris are bashing each other, and every stereotype is confirmed. Hello, we go to the top of the charts. Ironic thing about that is. I used to really hammer Alan Duff in those days. Really hammer Alan. But he's actually become a mate today. I'm actually working with him on a bit of a project. I've put him with some people to develop some of the ideas he's got for a follow-up to Once Were Warriors. But him and I have sort of become mates over the last 2 or 3 years, believe it or not. Because I suppose as you get older, you get a bit more conservative. I challenged him about 3 years ago to support a mate of mine who's an MP over on the shore, Shannon Halbert. I don't know if you know Shan. And I said to Alan Duff, would you come to do a bit of a speech for Shan? He's a gay Māori, I know you don't support those sorts of people. And he did. He came and did a speech for Shan in the pub. Got in a bit of a punch-up with the cameraman outside, but we've sort of been mates ever since. I thought...
I think that might have been our cameraman.
It wasn't a spin-off. Yeah, that's right. It was a spin-off. Because I said to Alan, gee, this is great. You filled the pub up. We're waiting for the story on Shan's big evening, and all we see is you having a punch-up with the cameraman. So Duffy and I have been sort of mates since then, because I thought, well, good on you, and of course Shan became the local MP.
I mean, it does kind of feel like that's one of the beauties of it being quite a small country is you can't help but bump into each other, and that helps.
That's right. It was a spin-off cameraman, wasn't
it? So funny. The other kind of big phase of your career subsequent to that was radio, both with Wātea and also with Talkback, which I think a lot about Talkback and how it had some of the functions of what social media had in terms of providing a mass reach way of just regular people kind of airing their views, except that it had a dump button, that was a good way of a little bit of a restraint there.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the medium? What is it about radio that made you spend so much time there?
I started on radio with the first Māori radio setup. Was called Aotearoa Radio. And then I worked in Mana Māori Media, and then I set up Wātea myself and John Tamahiri. And then later on, in the 2005 or 6, I went to Radio Live. I got recruited into Radio Live, and the guy who recruited me had watched my TV show, which was called Eye to Eye. And I loved the talkback radio. I've seen your analogies with social media. I think you're being a bit unfair because I think that they actually do go through a pretty thorough process to get. I know you get maniac talkback hosts, I do agree, but they do. I mean, they really do work through a process. I know at Radio Live, so many people wanted to be talkback hosts. When John and I were on, Shane Jones was
I meant more about the callers than the hosts. Honestly, like the hosts of the platform.
Yeah, you get some crazy callers, And I'll say this, that, when we went on to Talkback, John and I, which was 2005, 2006, I think, because we did 7 years, it was always the area of the right wing, the rednecks. You never really had lefty talkback hosts, and you never had pro-Māori talkback hosts. The most you probably ever had in the past, and probably the only one I could think of, was maybe Pam Corkery. But if you think back in terms of talkback hosts, they're always right-wingers. It's the Leighton Smith ilk, who... and so if you've got right-wing hosts, then you attract right-wing callers all the time. And so Live went out they went out to the edge, and like what John and I was doing, and so they chucked us in before... or after Michael Laws, I think. They chucked us in after Michael Laws.
That's a pretty different kind of a leader.
You can remember those days, you had, and then you had Paul Henry in after us. And I loved the Live. What I loved about it was Live. What I particularly loved about it was here was an opportunity to put Māori initiatives to the fore. And I always say to people, if you over those 7 years, we brought people like Hone Harawera, Tama Iti, Titawhai Harawera, Donna Awatere into the studio and on the airwaves. You never would have ever seen that in the history of New Zealand Talkback. I mean, normally right-wing hosts they're the enemy, right? They're the enemy. You don't engage with the enemy. We made the enemy, I suppose, accessible. Sadly, we became the enemy in the end, but, it's another, and I'm really sad how it all finished for us, because I think, we had an incredible 7 years, and then I had another 2-3 years with Ali Moore after that. But to have a pro-Māori perspective on the airways was, was something I loved, and really I've done a lot of things, in terms of TV shows. Yeah,
talk about your TV time as well.
Yeah.
Basically, what I feel like you've got this career that sort of spans the peak of the old forms of media, and as we're moving to shape the new one. So I'd like to get a perspective on that, and then we can start to talk about this next thing you're building.
And you got to remember that the media for me, of course, was always a sideline, because my main work was in my early days was union work. I was a union official, and then that was my main work. I went to Parliament in 99, and then I was a broadcasting spokesman for the alliance between 99 and 2002. And when I came out, I set Wātea up and then became community CEO. So my main work, and I don't really see it as work, but I see it as a privilege, has been working with our communities. Media really has just been was a sideline. It was just I'll do that on the side, and then the whole thing blew up because I ended up with 3 TV shows, which was Eye to Eye.
It's quite a big sideline.
Yeah. Well, it became a big sideline. It was good money too, might I add. All of a sudden, the sideline became quite a big earner in terms of you had Eye to Eye, and then John and I had a TV show that was on TVNZ, and then on Māori TV I had my own show. Again, the perspective in terms of let's go to Eye, Māori perspective, but also bringing in the left and the right wing. You recall the show, the Eye to Eye show? I don't know if I used to have all the national politicians come in, and the Jerry Brownlees, the John Keys, and they liked it too, because they wanted to feel comfortable about challenging Māori things without being called racist.
Yeah.
So we did 6 years of that. Claudette Hoherty was my executive producer. She's terrific. She's an old mate. She stood for the National Party. I don't know if you remember. She was the first gay, open gay person who stood, and then Key got rid of her because she mucked up something. But she's working for Wātea today in Parliament. You know, she's an old mate, but brilliant producer. And we had 6 years of this eye to eye. Now, the eye to eye was Bill Ralston's idea.
Right.
Because he based it on the Ralston group.
Yeah.
And he wanted a Māori version of it. And that's how Eye to Eye came about. And we had about 120, 130 shows. They were great shows. Like Judith was on it, Collins and Key and Brownlee, and of course all the Māori rads. And we had some great times. And the whole thing is, let's debate issues honestly. This is real Kiwi. And it was in that time, of course, when Labour was running the...
Foreshore and Seabed.
Yeah, no, but also Labour had that different setup in terms of broadcasting.
Yes.
They, and we were able to do shows like that. And then I was doing Eye to Eye, and then the spin-off was, pardon the pun, the spin-off was the radio live stuff that John and I was doing. It was really good days, where you were able to talk about Māori issues and really contentious stuff, and valuable days for me and it complemented a lot of the work that we were doing in the community. John and I was doing in the community.
So it's interesting that you talk about that, because I feel like that decade was the last period where sort of everyone was looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
Like as soon as you got broadband and we sort of started to splinter off into
Russell
our
Brown
own.
And them doing all their stuff.
That's right.
Russell and them were doing some good stuff.
Yeah. But I guess the thing that sort of happened subsequent to that is like you started to have this fracturing of audiences into different places.
After about 210, 211.
Yeah. That's my kind of thesis of it. And ultimately, in that decade, we went from everyone was just naturally exposed to public media, and all of us were sort of in the same place, largely consuming some of the same things. And that kind of helped glue you together as a society, I think.
And people had their say.
Yeah.
So you had, that's what I thought Russell's stuff was valuable. I thought our stuff was valuable, and people were having their say. There wasn't just one say. Also National Radio, I don't know if you remember, they used to have Māori news in the morning. They used to have Māori language segments. That all got chucked out after 211, 212 too. So it was a fascinating, and obviously I had beefs with National Radio, and
yes, you have.
I've had beefs with them and TV, because I'm and you've heard what I've said. New Zealand is more than one group of people. It's and I'm not just talking a Māori thing. Oh, we've got a lot of different communities here. Right. You don't necessarily see all of them on our, the biggest platforms. So this is ultimately, in some respects, what the backdrop to ANZ-PM, this merger of RNZ and TVNZ, probably the biggest change in our media environment since the introduction of New Zealand On Air. What is the intention here, and what would you like to see happen with out the back of this? I'd like to see a lot of what we had in that first decade. I'd like to see more voices out there. People say, it's just about the Māori voice. I says, no, it's not. It's not about the Māori voice only. But obviously I want to see that much more prominent. I want to see the Pacific voice. I want to hear, Melissa Lee talks about the Asian. She's quite right too. I want, this is a different New Zealand. I know the opposition keeps saying everything's still the same. They talk about, democracy hasn't changed and all this. They go, Willie Jackson says that there's a new democracy. I don't know why they keep trying to resist that, because clearly there was a new democracy from 1996 when MMP came in. Absolutely, there's been a new democracy, And
I think an improved one in terms of representation. But
they keep saying, Willie says there. I was thinking, why do these guys keep resisting? In 96, you had Winston Peters choose who the government was. That's a new democracy, And then you had John Key choose who was going to be the MP for Epsom. Remember that? Well, they've forgotten that. You couldn't do that under the old democracy. You couldn't get a Rastafarian in in the old democracy.
Yeah, this is the diversity of what Parliament looks like and the way it behaves.
Well, that's right,
and
we need to mirror that in the mainstream media. That's what I'm saying, because Parliament has become diverse. You know, the new democracy gives us more women. We didn't have that pre-96. More Pacifica, more Māori. I want that type of. I want that set up on public media. We want that on public. We want more diversity. We want more opportunity. And if that means bringing our two entities together, which is the plan, and rationalising our money, as is the plan, and we've still got a bit to fix up there, but you would have seen the figures we were talking about. I think we can do it. And people actually like the principle. The Nats, of course, are going, everything's fine. No, there's no problem. National radio's great. Everybody's being heard. No, everybody's not being heard. Everybody's not being seen. And the other side of it is, the social media platforms are just, in my view, out of control. You've got people disappearing down rabbit holes now. That anything they hear, I've got relations. Anything they hear, anything they see, this is the real deal.
But because they presented themselves as great places for that, and they didn't have any vetting processes, and people figured that out. And so I want to do a whole section on social media, because I think when we talk about media, and we've got a minister and we've got all this legislation around it, we're always talking about this type of media, the type of media that we're creating now, and yet the actual, by far the bigger one in terms of its reach, in terms of its monetization, our one's shrinking, their one's growing explosively, and we never really talk about it in a political sense. So I do want to get into that. I think one thing that's really interesting to me about this is, like, on some level, I mean, what you're referring to is ultimately a public media that services all different communities and different demographics, which hasn't really been doing over the last 10 years.
But also tells us what's the New Zealand story, Duncan? Well, that's what you've got to know. I think the New Zealand story's changed. I mean, what were our best examples of the New Zealand story? Probably Country Calendar, probably some of the stuff we did on Māori TV. What's the New Zealand story today?
But what I'm curious about is how you tell where that New Zealand story sits, because the way that young people consume media is just so different now that, building a website or building a streaming platform, will actually come and consume it, because that is as big a piece as actually creating the content is how you distribute it. Because back in the day, you just put it on TV, hundreds of thousands of people watch it, no matter what. Now, like 25 to 54, like there's like 50,000 people watching a show now. It's heavily funded shows, and they're just not getting an audience. So, what's your sort of vision for how this thing will be distributed so that it can make sure that it finds those people who currently get no public media in their diet?
I think we're trying to find the vehicle for that. I think that's the thing, because I think first of all we have to bring these entities together. Then we get people. I've mentioned people like you. We need to bring some of the people in. Gavin Ellis has had a crack at us. Good on him. Yeah. Bring him in. Because I don't know Gavin, but I've read some of his stuff. I read some of your stuff. We don't have all the answers in terms of how we reach them. But what we know right now is you've got a loose setup. We've got a real loose setup. It's a shambles, really, and people can listen to anything and everything. And we have nothing concrete in terms of what we're presenting as an entity, although National will have you believe that everything's okay. I think you bring it together, you bring in I'm excited by what's ahead of us. We've got a select committee process to go through over the next 6 months. Looking forward to contributions because there obviously are gaps in terms of this bill that we've put up. And guys like you will fill that gap, because we've got to work out what the vehicle's going to be.
So I'm quite curious about that, because one thing, a contributor of ours, Samson Samasoni, has written about the fact that there are some quite deep-seated fears within sort of like Pacific media. Will they get sort of monstered by this thing? Obviously, same goes for Māori media too. How and honestly, like our kind of private sector media, we're looking at the scale of this while we're shrinking and they're growing massively and going, how will this kind of relate to us? Will it swallow us whole, or will it be a thing that kind of reaches out and kind of, has relationships with these other kind of media entities rather than just kind of just crushing them underneath its weight?
You can't have that. You can't have it crush setups like Pacific Media or Māori Media. I had the same fear from Māori Media. I mean, I was the chairman of Māori media. And so I have friends who run the governance side, a woman by the name of Whetu Whala. She's a very prominent Pacifica Māori. And, this is the worst thing. This is before I became broadcasting minister. This is the worst thing possible. Because I think we all think the extreme, right? It's like we've got to, it's like we want our independence. But with that independence, and that's what we did in Māori media, we had this. I opposed the iwi radio network when it first started because I wanted a Māori national radio.
That's the tension, right? Because Labour often wants to build a big central thing rather than have it be a bit more decentralised.
That's right. So, but in the end, Māori media did get the iwi network, and I worked in it. And in fact, I became the chairman of the iwi network, even though I said, I want a Māori. Anyway, I ended up chair, and then I understood why you've got to have your independence, but you don't want it lost in one big model. That's the fear with the public entity. So I want to talk with some of our Pacifica brothers and sisters because we have to put in protections there. The other side of it is we have to stop talking to ourselves too. While we're talking to ourselves, it's really important, but we need to get those Pacifica messages, those Māori messages on mainstream. And right now, they're absolutely minimal. I was on Te Karere 2 days ago with Scotty Morrison, and I was saying in our language that despite what Te Karere does, the Māori voice on TVNZ is minimal, apart from half an hour on a Sunday. So the same with Pacifica. So I want to see, because I've done the Māori media review, I want to see the best of on mainstream, but I also want that autonomy maintained too. And I don't think it has to be either or. I think we can run both because that's how it's run before. You've had bureaucrats who said it's either this or this. I want both because they don't want to fund both sometimes, you see.
I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about the internet as a, it's not a linear platform. There isn't really prime time to the same extent. If you make it all and you figure out a good way to surface it and distribute it, you can have it all. The thing that will be interesting is you were at TVNZ during the charter era. A lot of people felt like it was quite reluctant to have the charter, and as soon as Key gave them the opportunity, they were like, "Cool, yeah, we'll give that back and just focus on making money again." Are you confident that the sort of cultures of TVNZ and RNZ can mesh, and that the commercial, the charter, and the public service broadcasting ethos, and all of this kind of Māoritanga and everything else that you want to happen, can all happen at once? Because that seems like a lot.
Am I confident? It's going to take a bit of work. I've talked with the Simon Powers, and I'm talking with Simon again next week. The Paul Thompsons, I've talked with our Māori experts. Of course, it's if you looked at it from a distance, you think, it's impossible, waste of time. But the principle of it sounds good.
It sure does.
It sure does.
Lots of principles sound good.
but what's the option to continue how we're going? Because at the moment, radio is now not the most trusted source. TV is not. And that's falling. Those audiences are falling. I think what are the options? I think we can make it. Everybody. This is, as you said, this is a small country. Lots of people have worked on the radio side, have worked on the TV side. Same in the Māori space. So, am I really confident? I'm confident that people will give this a good crack. I had a broadcasting minister. I told him, he said, please don't use my name. He said exactly what you said. He says, it won't work. There's too many different agendas. I says, but do you like the idea? Oh, great idea, he says. Great idea.
So it's about giving it a try because the current thing is just not, it's actually just completely inequitable,
where
right?
are the audiences going?
Yeah.
And then as well as that, what are they listening to and what are they seeing? We've seen terrible examples of that when we saw that lot down in Wellington in Parliament. I couldn't believe some of the stuff they were saying.
So let's talk about that because I'm really curious about what we've been talking about, and this government, and has had a real program of work around media and across multiple kind of avenues. There we have the Broadcasting Standards Authority, we have we have Advertising Standards Authority. We've just got so many
Broadcasting Act from '89.
We've got so much legislation, and yet over here which is ultimately about a group of media which is shrinking. You've got half as many journalists as we did in 2006.
That's right.
And yet the social media, which is exactly what you're talking about, a totally unregulated environment where anything can be said.
Well, they come in after the Broadcasting Act, didn't they?
And so, and we don't have, who is the minister in charge of social media? Is it you?
I suppose so, and we're going through a whole content regulation review right now, and I'm waiting on some of the results, and we're working that with Jan Tinetti in Internal Affairs. Look, there's a lot of things out of control, but I'm trying to bring some balance to it. I'm also looking in the next. Yesterday I was meant to have met with Google. That's been put off till next week. They're itching to get in with me, and then I'm meeting with Meta or Facebook over the next couple of weeks. I think you rightly bring up what's happened in this country, because we've had a lot of...
Because it feels like we're sort of tearing apart a bit.
And look at the amount of journalists now, They've halved in the last 10 years.
But it's not just that. You look at the occupation of Parliament. That's kind of unimaginable without a completely unregulated, unmediated information sphere that just sort of, those people were effectively suffering a mass delusion, or a number of them, in terms of things that they believed that there was no evidence to support. Are you going to sort of try and figure out a way to, or is that just out of control and we can't do anything about it?
No, I think, with this content regulation, we'll be able to, we need to bring a set of rules to the table, right? We have to. At the same time, you have to balance those rules with freedom of expression. Like, how do you manage? Like, they'll say, well, we'll watch whatever we want to watch. But what's the priority for us?
It's not so much to me about what people watch; it's about what they're exposed to and how quickly that goes very broad.
That's right.
And because we have this, and it's. The original sin is Section 230, the US law that says that you're not liable for anything published on these platforms. We don't actually have an equivalent here. It's never even really been tested. To your mind, should there be consequences for the platforms when they, it's not, to me, it's not necessarily about the individual. It's about the wildly profitable enterprise that it is distributing misinformation and disinformation.
Oh, I think that there should be consequences.
And what should those consequences be?
Well, that's what we're trying to work through, and you've got to balance that. You have to balance, like how do you protect people? What's my job as a minister? Well, try probably to protect some, particularly young ones who might not have had the education that you've had and others. They can't actually work out what's real and what's not real. And so
these platforms, when they first emerged, presented themselves as great places to get news and information, keep in touch with friends and family, and they became something very different. And they never announced that they were something different.
That's right, and there's no rules around it. There's no rules around it.
So when will we sort of see that start to crystallise into legislation?
September, we're waiting for our final response, and then we're going to. And I've said exactly what you've said. Where are the consequences here? And then you've got...
Because it's profitable, man. Even with the
do we have to be brave and courageous as a government and say these are the rules, these are the consequences, and if safety is your first priority, then that's the way we should be going.
Because that's the way historically media has been a highly regulated activity in New Zealand. You needed basically permission to talk to a lot of people because it was considered almost dangerous. That was probably a bit much for what we have nowadays, but it feels like to have this complete libertarian sphere over one side and one that's highly regulated on the other, it just doesn't...
Just remember, Duncan, the Broadcasting Act we put out in 1989.
So is it still fit for purpose?
No, it's not fit for purpose at all. We didn't anticipate all this. No, I don't think any of us saw the social media phenomenon coming.
But it's been here for such a long time.
Taken over people's lives. And no government has done anything in terms of updating legislation, which is a challenge for us or for any government.
And that's on your agenda now?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we've got another 4 years. But I want to make that a priority. How do we update things? How do we protect people? How do we put some license around what's happening in social media? We've got a Broadcasting Act that no longer is applicable. And anybody can say anything and do anything, like your mate Sean Plunker.
Well, in some ways I admire Sean for giving it a crack.
No, good on him. Good on him. And I've said that to him too.
So this is quite related to that. And we talk about the halving of the number of journalists. That's basically because the economic model that created journalism, particularly print journalism, has sort of disintegrated before our eyes. Now, in Australia, they sort of saw that. They made a judgment that was largely because Google and Facebook in particular had this ability to piggyback off the presence of journalism on their platforms and make remarkable sums of money, and there was no ability for in their judgment, media platforms to negotiate with them on any kind of fair basis. Now, there has been a sort of a looming consideration of whether that should happen here. When I speak to Meta in particular, they're like, that Australian thing was a one-time thing. And I say to them, well, you can't have a one-time thing in a very closely linked economy that's right there. And we've got journalists in Australia now who are earning 40% more than here. And you're seeing New Zealand journalists, now the borders are open, are just flooding across. We've hardly got enough of them to begin with. So when they say that, which I'm sure they'll say to you, and when we look at the scale of the deals that were done in Australia versus the scale of the deals that are being offered here, do you think it's right that we're getting sort of 20 cents in the dollar at best of what they did in Australia?
That's the type of kōrero I'm going to be having with them over the next couple of weeks, Duncan. They're trying to. I know they're a bit irritated that I haven't been able to face them yet. But I mean, I see what you see. I hear what you hear. We had the Commerce Commission say for the MPA, for instance, to start some bargaining.
Well, that's what we're part of that collective bargaining agreement.
That hasn't happened.
Well, they've got no incentive to do it unless there's legislation.
That's right.
So is there legislation coming?
We have... Whāwhoi talked to them about that,
But I remember, last year, I had Chris on this podcast, and he said, by October, we expect to see deals done. That was last year.
October last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're a sort of deal.
They made a deal with NZME. That's fine. Public listed company. They're about getting a buck quota. Right. They broke away from the collective.
Yeah.
But for the balance of the industry, the ODTs, the community papers, and the whole point of collective bargaining is that anyone can join it. So your Māori media, your Pacific media can get amongst this.
Who've all suffered because of this.
Well, and not only that they if the spin-off or stuff isn't able to bargain, well, what hope do we have for these smaller operators? So
I said this the other day to my team. I said I've talked with Paul Thompson, National, that they're negotiating at the moment.
But it doesn't feel like a negotiation, right? And
I said to him, how's it going? All right. And I thought, well, if the National Radio are struggling, what hope for Pukekohe newspaper?
So I mean, and this is the thing that I sort of struggle with a bit, is like all the incentives for them are to go slow. Yeah. Like just drag it out forever. Yeah. Hopefully the other side gets exhausted or goes away. Will you kind of make a commitment to actually not let this thing go? Because this industry has seen this.
I hear you, and I absolutely feel the same way. I feel the same way as you, but I also have to show them respect, and Whāwhoi had a relationship with them, and I'm going to go through that process. But what you're saying is what people are saying to me all the time. But I think in terms of the legislation, I think you only bring legislation in, and if they can't cut proper deals with the industry, and I want to see evidence of those deals, Right. I don't want to, and I've been told that there's a lot in place. I'm looking forward to it. But, the reality is, when they decided to do it in Australia, you and I both know, bang.
But the deals came very quickly. But it took the legislation, right?
Yeah,
the legislation had to be right there.
Absolutely. And now, have we looked at legislation? We would have told you that that's something we have been looking at. It's a heavy hand to bring it in.
Yeah. Is it far away?
Look. I have to go through this process with them and show them the respect, because they've been adamant. They've been meeting with my people that they can do deals. I know you're.
Well, look, they got the best lobbyists in the country.
Yeah, I know you're a total skeptic, but there's some good people who are working for them.
There are great people working for them.
But
I don't know if I trust the dude at the top. You know what I
mean? Well, I couldn't possibly go there, Duncan. But they know that. I come from this is the background I come from. So I hear the small person. I've heard them. And if I hear NZME struggling to get a proper deal, National Radio struggling to get a better deal, then what chance for the small player? And I'll be asking those questions.
All right. Well, I look forward to hearing how that goes. Because you're right, they are good people working there, but fundamentally, it's in their interest to just keep talking.
What sort of money do they make a month?
What do you mean? Facebook?
Facebook, Google.
Facebook?
120 million?
Out of New Zealand?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, they pay almost no tax here because and that's the thing that really irks me.
There's
like, there's been this kind of digital
colonization.
They've digitally colonised us effectively, you know, like they've
but
taken all this
the news
attention.
doesn't, the latest I've heard is the news doesn't really drive.
Well, they are trying.
You've heard that, haven't you?
Well, absolutely. And they're trying to pull news off the platform.
Yeah.
You know, they've explicitly said that they're just sort of slowly turning it down. What they did in Australia, where they just got rid of it wholesale, obviously that didn't work very well. But if you just slowly turn it down, the frog just boils without knowing it. But I mean, is that what we want? Is that you can't even really distribute news on their platforms?
No, we want a fair marketplace. We want
and you want an informed populace because people have they came in and they said you can rely on Facebook to get your news.
So you trust some of the people around Facebook?
Well, I trust the people who work in news, but I mean they ultimately have very limited control over what the algorithm
well, give us
does.
let's see how it goes over
right.
the next month or two. Duncan, come back to me.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O-Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit so you can text, call or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
So, can we talk briefly about your appearance on Media Watch, which must have been quite a...
Oh, Media Watch, yep.
Like,
Colin Peacock.
Yeah, with Colin Peacock. How did you enjoy that? You know, like...
I was disappointed with Colin. Don't get me wrong, he's a top journalist. I was disappointed because I sit here like I'm with you, and I said to you at the start, ask me any question you like. And I said the same to him. Anything you like, anywhere you want to go. And we would have did 45 minutes easy. And he said, I said, you got any other questions? No. Then I listened to the interview, and the interview was okay, fine, I suppose. Everybody said the interview was fine. But he cut me up for 7 or 8 minutes before the interview, and I thought, gee, that's disappointing, you know. I didn't put a complaint in about it. He can do whatever. People can say whatever they like, but I just find that a bit disappointing. And he found different parts in my career, like his whole thing is you're so confrontational, blah, blah, blah. But I'm an advocate for our people. I've been an advocate for Māori. I've been an advocate for working class people, not just Māori too, as a union official. So most of my working life is about challenging the establishment. And so he doesn't seem to get the hang of that. He just wanted to pull out different parts of my career where I've had a bit of a scrap here and there. And, you know, when I was on national radio with Carol Hirschfield, which I was fine with that if he had told me.
Because you do seem to like enjoy the discussion.
I
right?
like a debate, and if you want to have a crack at me, have a crack at me to my face. But he never did that. He just cut me up for 7 or 8 minutes. Then he played our interview, which was, you know, wasn't a bad interview.
So one of the things that you said on it was that you didn't know any Māori who listened to RNZ, and I'm sure that was on some level a little bit of hyperbole, but that is a relatively commonly held view that it has an older and whiter audience.
Yes.
What happens if you build this new public media entity?
Yes.
And no one shows up, or the same audience that's already getting well served shows up. What's the response?
Yeah, that'd be disappointing. That'd be disappointing. I mean, when I see that, I was exaggerating a bit. My wife listens to national radio too, and you know, people who are in the game, they listen. There's a few Māori who do, but generally they don't. And it's going to be a challenge to get them on. But I think if you get some of, you know, one of the things with national radio, and I listen to it and all the time, and I like Paul Thompson very much, and I think he's made an effort in terms of Māori program, but they're still way off. They're still around about 2%, and my disappointment with them was they cut the Māori programming, they cut Māori news, they cut Māori language, and they don't have Māori presenters. And I always said, in over 100 years, you don't have a Māori presenter in prime time. They've got Māori now at midday. And I just think, imagine if we get some of the best of Māori in there, whether it's a Māori or Julian Wilcox, and our people might start listening if they hear themselves or see themselves, or see themselves too. And balance, imagine if you've got a Mihi Forbes on there.
Which, because they had her and she left it because
she couldn't get on. She couldn't make it. She couldn't get in there. And Mihi's
extraordinary talent.
She's just a queen. She's my mate. We've been mates for many years. So she's had mates who's had a crack at me every now and then. She took me to the BSA once, her and Annie Annabelle. That's all cool. That's us in our world, and we work together later on. But Mihi is, when you have extraordinary talent like a Mihi Forbes, Julian Wilcox, now Julian's doing the Māori show on national radio. I said to him the other day, what are you doing that Māori show for? I want you to be doing Morning Report, and Julian worked for me. You see, he worked for me at Wātea, and I just want to see a total change.
Yeah, well, they've got a vacant. So Susie Ferguson is leaving Morning Report.
She's good, Susie too. Yeah.
But we will. Would you like to see? Would you be disappointed if it wasn't a Māori voice that got? Because these slots don't come up very often.
Oh, I'd love to see a Māori voice in there. I mean, I've had that view for many. Not for me to tell them what to do. Yeah. But I've always had that view that why not grab a Māori voice? And we've got so much talent. Whether it's a Mihi or you've got Māori at midday. I mean, she's doing really well. Julian, who's doing afternoons. Why wouldn't you grab a Māori voice? You see, that's why I said in the past, why couldn't you get someone like a Derek Fox or someone, Wena Harawira, and I think National Radio have slipped. I know they had Carol overseeing things. And her and I mean, she's been friends with me in the past. I don't know, I haven't heard from her since we had that interview. But anyway, she's been an old mate. She was one of my producers. But I never saw the talent coming through. And I never saw when I challenged National Radio, and I have no regrets over that, they took it hard, but people take criticism hard. What they did since then, of course, you would have seen all their Pākehā presenters saying Māori phrases, which is great.
And then they use the Māori names, place names and the weather and so on. And that matters.
It does matter, but the challenge wasn't about getting the Pākehās to talk Māori. The challenge was about getting Māori programs on and Māori presenters. Although I support all the Pākehā presenters having a crack at our reel. Well done to all of them.
It's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah, but as I said to Paul, it's not, they're saying, ngā mihi o te wā, and tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Lovely. And that's a cultural change. And that was important for them, and they've had a lot of complaints about that. Now we want to see our people in there. We want to hear our language. We want to see our people, as well as other groupings too, because that's really important too. And so it's a big ask, but I think that it's possible. And they have such good interviewers. When you look at Corin and Guy, when he's on, and these are good people. Susie was very good.
Yeah, no, there's
Catherine Ryan, I think she's real good.
Kim Hill's pretty good.
Isn't she good? Well, Kim Hill's the best. Yeah. I mean, I'm a Kim Hill fan, I think
you're a fan of the media, which is great to have in your role.
I think Kim's great, I mean, I think Hoskins can interview.
He's very good.
He's very good. He doesn't like me at all. And he won't have...
But you've got to respect game,
Oh, no, I respect the game.
Yeah.
Hoskins can interview. Top interviewer. Plunkett's the same too.
So... The one thing I wanted to talk to you about is so before we got on there, you were talking about Leonie Hayden, who was editor of Mana magazine and the founding editor of Aotea on the Spin-Off. Very good friend of mine and someone you admire. One thing that she has persistently identified as a failing within our kind of media system is you just reeled off a long list of wildly talented Māori broadcasters because there has been a major state participation in broadcasting that's focused on Māori for some time, and you've been a major participant in that ecosystem. There has not been anything like a similar system within print, and as a result, Māori writers, journalists who work in that medium haven't had the same opportunities, and it's why basically we found a wealthy private individual who was the sort of who basically allowed us to start Aotea. Shout out to Peter Cooper for that, his generosity there. But it's still really hard. Even the PIJF, a little startup, which looks like it's going to come to an end.
2023, I think.
2023. What this new system, whether it's ANZ-PM or whatever happens to New Zealand On Air, and I want to talk about them shortly, is there any way that sort of imbalance where, if you're a young, talented, aspiring Māori journalist, there's a whole bunch of funded roles over here and there's basically nothing over on the print side, so you're naturally going to gravitate that way. Is that something that can be addressed?
Something I've always thought about for many, many years. As I said, I came through Mana Media with Derek Fox and Gary Wilson, and Gary Wilson set up the first Māori journalism setups in the late 80s, I think it was, the early 90s and late 80s. And, Māori journalists it's always been an untapped area. I think mainstream has been pretty useless, really, in terms of the way they've looked at Māori perspectives and Māori stories.
It's always been like a sort of an othering.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the best thing they could do is bring in Māori journalists, and you did that, I think, with Leone, and you guys have tried things. That's why you had E Tangata was set up by Gary Wilson and Tapu Missa. Terrific what they did, and still do. Oh no, they still do. But you still, we things are changing slowly. But
there almost needs to be a deliberate identification that this is a gap, and that right now it just doesn't sit anywhere, as far as I can tell.
It's a real...
Te Mangai Pāho don't really fund print. Like, no one really touches print and journalism, even though that has really collapsed in terms of numbers.
In my Māori broadcasting review, I'm trying to find a way through on this, because what we've had in terms of Māori broadcasting was always the total priority was the Māori language. Yeah. So you got Te Mangai Pāho doing Māori language, you got New Zealand On Air funding Māori programs. I get offside with fundamentalists because I keep saying it's not just about the language, it's about the Māori story. Yeah. What is the Māori story? And the
plenty of Māori don't have the language, and they still need to be fed.
So a Māori story about Leone's life or something, half an hour, about how she changed her life. That would be incredibly interesting.
But also, half an hour. You immediately go to a broadcast framework rather than 4,000 words. Do you know what I mean?
I know, and the written side is something that needed a lot of support. But
is it going to get it under this new framework?
Well, I need to find a way, because, as I said, to honour people like Gary Wilson, who said the same thing to me many years ago, John Tamahiri and I were going to actually fund a new magazine with Gary Wilson in 2013. You won't believe this. It was all set to start. We put a lot of our resourcing in. And then Roastbusters came along, and that was the end of the magazine.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, well, we were going to release that week, and because we were going to fund Gary, but I don't think that would have been the time to release a Māori magazine, back in 2013.
So, seeing as you brought it up, let's quickly touch on Roastbusters. When that is a very uncomfortable interview to listen back to. It was uncomfortable at the time. Since the way that societies have evolved subsequently, it remains more so now. How do you sort of feel about that episode, looking back on it from today?
Oh, it's the biggest regret of my broadcasting career. I don't have many regrets. It's probably just about the only regret, really, because, well, first and foremost, you never want to hurt anyone. That's not our style. That was never. People might not believe that of John, but it's not his style either. We work with women. We work in domestic violence areas. We run domestic violence programs, and so that's why I always, even though we never knew who that person was, because they never identified themselves. First and foremost, you don't want to hurt anyone, and that's why I apologise then, and have apologised a number of times since. And it's just. I think it was an example too of we weren't even concentrating at the time. We were just sort of half listening, and it was about getting towards it. It just shows you've got to concentrate all the time when you do this job.
It did have the feel of like Talkback can have this kind of laid back, provocateur sort of style.
We were playing devil's advocate stuff.
And so often you're just dealing with basically some pretty low stakes material.
Yeah.
And then suddenly this thing comes along that is as serious as your life, and it didn't feel like you flipped.
And I was disappointed, and I remember, I wanted our women particularly to understand that there was nothing meant to, and all our women who were around us, they know us. We made a mistake. It's not something we did. That's not us. I mean, if that was me, Ali Moore wouldn't have worked with me for the next 3 years, right? She's the queen of the Me Too movement, and me and Ali and I, that's not us. I support women 100% and women's rights, and I did equal pay for work. I worked with the Clerical Workers Union, for instance, but it was a bad moment in our time, and we weren't concentrating, and we hurt a lot of women. It was a terrible way to finish our careers. It was him and John and I finished together because we had 7 years, and it was such a great 7 years. And for that, we won awards. For me, it remains the best part of my broadcasting life. I get more responses off the work that John and I did than I have as a minister, than I have as a CEO, than I have had as a record boss, as a TV host, as a minister. It's incredible. And so it was a terrible way to finish. And I was glad to work for another 3 years afterwards. But it remains a major regret. What I find interesting is how people, some people say they'll never forgive us. I'm thinking, really? Really? I see that pop up on...
It doesn't...
I work with murderers and rapists. I've worked with... my mother, we find ways to forgive them. And we work with them and we rehabilitate their lives. And you're going to... look up here, I'll never forget that. And that one stuff up defines us, but you can forgive maybe Paul Holmes for talking about cheeky darkies.
Yeah. I think that you come from an era and represent a paradigm that is, it is more combative. It's comfortable, kind of much more engaging with people that you disagree with, and with forgiveness. And I feel like there was a brief period where that went a long way out of fashion. I think it might be coming back. I'm just conscious that we've got...
it's all good, but I think it's also that was a time too where, that Roastbusters was all over the media, and I think that we copped that. But I do say that you had talkback hosts who had totally violated our people. Gave away.
It was routine.
Gave away our people's phone numbers, home numbers online. Holmesy, who I was a big fan of, goes and calls Kopi Annan a cheeky darky, but I like Holmes very much. All of them are forgiven. John Key's forgiven for pulling people's hair, but for us, we're just the scum of the earth forever and a day. I couldn't work that out, because I tell you something, we spend our lives helping people.
Yeah,
and I think that's a difference.
It's a ledger. It's not just a single data point.
That's right.
So the one entity that we haven't talked a lot about that is very pertinent to the ANZ-PM is New Zealand On Air, which is seeing its... We haven't had this confirmed, but it's like, if you just take away TVNZ's funding and the RNZ funding that was effectively passed through income, it's suddenly a lot smaller, and it's still got its staff, it's still got its same challenge. There's still a beauty in the idea of a decentralised, distributed public media that can kind of, fill a lot of those holes that might exist otherwise. What is your sort of view of the future of New Zealand On Air, and does it just have to accept that it's a lot smaller now?
I met with Ruth about 3 weeks ago, and she asked...
The chair of New Zealand
On Air. And look, let's be clear. I mean, obviously, and she just wants it on the table. Well, what's our future?
Because they've got a plan. They've got staff who are thinking about this very intently.
And she says, and she's right. You can't just say nothing will change, because that's been our line, right? Nothing will change.
But if $40 million changes, that's quite material.
That's right. So I think we're going to find that out. I really respect what New Zealand On Air has done. But when you go into a direct funding model, right, as we're going to do with the new entity, obviously there's going to be some effect. Obviously there's going to be a clash and a conflict. And I think that our establishment board we'll work that out. And I said to Ruth, I gave her a commitment too, that we're going to, let's just keep talking here, because, you got a hole in terms of funding. There's obviously consequences that will happen.
Is there definitely going to be a hole? Because there has been some conjecture that they might, that there might be some, because if you imagine that the current TVNZ funding has gone, then suddenly that sort of contestable budget is now quite slight. And there are some things like drama and even some kind of bigger budget comedies that almost become, and certainly those telly features, they're almost not plausible in a $60 million budget.
That's right. Well, I don't think that is confirmed at all. All right, there are still, there's still...
What would you like to see?
I'd like to see both entities working together. And also, I think budgets, of course, are the budget's always going to be the big telling factor, every year. I think that we have to confirm things a bit more for the broadcasting sector. They don't want to be coming every year and also with, we don't know if we're going to be the government all the time. So we want to put something in place so that both entities can complement each other. And I think that's the key. I don't think we really know yet, because the establishment board and we have to get through the next 6 months in terms of the select committee process. You note that we lengthened that select committee process out. Initially we were talking about having this up and finished by the end of the year, but I decided along with officials that let's take it out to the end of January so that people can really feed into it. Give it time. I think if we're going to rush it through, which... it wouldn't have been right, but we're on target still, and I think we're in a sort of unseen area in terms of the funding. You would have heard of the type of funding that we're going to put in, but who knows? In terms of how commercial revenues go, what we're going to top up, all that sort. There's a bit of a void there, but I do know that I have been challenged by New Zealand On Air. I think that's fair, and I want to be upfront with them in terms of where we're going. So we're sort of finding our way with that.
So one of the big sort of signature elements of this government's engagement with media has been the Public Interest Journalism Fund. It's a weird thing, right, where it's a considerable sum of money. It was well-intentioned. It's not been uncomplicated. Anything that you start isn't. But it's really become a lightning rod for a segment of the population as proof that the media has been bought off. This is a real talking point.
That's what Plunkett and them are saying, right?
It's what Plunkett's saying. ACT, the Taxpayers Union. And they might not be saying it in so many words. But certainly their supporters, if you look on social media, it's rife. Yeah. And concomitantly through COVID, which is actually a time when both government and media had a really difficult job to do, we've seen trust in media crater. And when you look back on, which makes this already hard job, both economically and the actual practicalities of it even harder. When you look back at the PIJF and start to contemplate what might replace that sort of revenue and ability on the other side, potentially through these kind of settlements, what do you sort of make of it and how it's rolled out?
Well, I think it's rolled out really well. And, we've been able to get groups who haven't had support, groups who have been affected too with what's been happening in terms of the whole reduction in with regards to journalists, and that voice has been invisible. You've got groups like I Tangata, Mihi Forbes and Annabelle have had Māori journalists, they've got Māori journalist training in place. I think it's been excellent. We're talking 55 million, we'll be through the money next year. I think the challenge now is how we're going to replace that. Yeah. That's why these deals with the big players, the Googles and the Metas, is really really important going forward. In terms of the media being bought off, the government buying off media, what a load of nonsense.
I think it's manifestly nonsense. If you went through and looked at the coverage, you'd be like, man, if this is what we get for buying them
that's
off,
right.
Well, I want a refund.
Do you really think these Māoris who I've been part of cut me any favours sometimes?
Just look at the coverage. Look at the coverage. But what I would say is that, that corrosive element of it, and particularly the involvement of social media, which has, on the one hand, it's kind of a lot of the advertising revenues which used to fund media are now sort of functionally going there, and yet that's also where the trust erosion has happened because people have been saying things on there which don't...
Well, I mean, look, there's always little bits of things that are true, like if you look at the application into that New Zealand rolled out, they talk about the treaty and all that sort of stuff. And look, they might have gone a bit too far. I think they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that,
Yeah, because I've talked to them and I said, but I think they try, people just trying to do the right thing. Will they roll that out? And I said, I wouldn't expect, because Sean and them go, Sean Plunkett will say you have to swear allegiance to the treaty, you have to do that.
Every time I speak to him, that's the first thing he says.
I don't want that. I don't want them. I want them to understand the treaty, but I don't want anyone to swear allegiance to the treaty. I want them to be editorially independent.
It needs to be sort of
absolutely. And so they might have gone a little bit far in those areas. We can fix all that up. We should fix all that up. But if you really think that some of these news groups are totally loyal to us, Duncan, you're in la la land. I'll show you some of the stuff that Wate has done where they've hammered me and these are my mates, for goodness sake. You think Mihi Forbes and them will show us any slack? She took me to the broadcasting standards, for goodness sake. So it's a load of nonsense, and it's Sean and them and Hoskins and them playing it up, and it's been a great investment, and we need to replace that 55 million somehow, and so that's why negotiations with the tech giants are really important, and we as a government have to continue to treat this area really seriously.
A couple of very quick questions to close. Firstly, in terms, can I get some? I feel like I'm suddenly like a breakfast radio host or something here. But I've been talking to your predecessor, Chris Whāwhoi, and we've been talking about this for a long time. If we're here in a year's time and there are still no deals signed, what kind of a time frame are you talking about in terms of you want to see something in place?
I want to see something in place over the next 3 to 6 months.
Right, so by Christmas kind of thing.
Yeah, well, we've got to, let's have some deals.
Because it's in their interest to drag it out.
Yeah, it's in their interest to drag it out,
And that's why I think having a firm line.
Yeah, that's right. You talk about legislation, that's always in our back pocket. Whāwhoi would have told you that. Chris would have told you that. That's not.
But it might need to come out of the back pocket.
That's not. You want that, of course, Duncan. That's your option. But if we can set up good deals for everyone, which they are saying to us that they'll do, then that's the way we go. It's not our preferred. That's not our preferred option, but they know, because Chris Whāwhoi has already told them, legislation is always an option, but I'm not going down that track at the moment.
So, and finally, maybe it's a little bit cute, but we've listed off a whole bunch of, we've been talking all this time about these kind of great kind of journalists and combative interviewers and broadcasters, and you were one of them until very recently, right? What would Willie, the broadcaster, if somehow you could split in two and we're assessing your performance as broadcasting minister, and and sort of what kind of accountability, like what would Willie the broadcaster make of Willie the minister so far?
Well, what do you make of me?
Well, I'm not you.
It's not for me to critique.
Well, I like the fact that you're willing to really get in and kind of address some of this personally.
Yeah.
And that is a refreshing thing that's not common from a government that is, most governments very reticent to make any kind of commitment because they might be pinned down. But I am curious about, how much that the fact that you have been that person informs the way that you're conducting yourself in this role.
My style doesn't change. I like to meet people. I like to challenge people, challenge organisations, despite what Mr. Peacock tried to make out. I'm not a bad-tempered person who gets into scraps with everyone, but I don't mind a scrap. But that's not my preferred way of working. I like to work respectfully with people, and then if you reach a point where you're going nowhere, then I will always challenge. That's how I've operated through life as a broadcaster, as an advocate for our people, as a union official, and he tried to paint some sort of a picture of me being ill-disciplined. I was disappointed with that, given that we had a good interview. You've met me. I'm up for a bit of a challenge.
Yes, you are.
And I like that. That's how I operate. And I can actually get on well with people with different views all the time. Guys, Simon Bridges is a real example of it.
We actually have to finish this interview so he can come in and take over the studio.
And he's a good man. We have different views, Might go on Jerry Brownlee's podcast. He's a good man too. There's very few people I won't get on with, but now and then if you have to have a scrap or you have to walk, then so be it. I don't have a problem with that.
I sense that. Hey, thank you so much for coming on this podcast, Willie. It's
well
been
done
a lot
to
of fun.
Spin-Off. You guys are going really well.
Really appreciate
Kia ora.
that. Kia ora.
The Fold was brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with Daylight. It was hosted by Duncan Grieve, produced by Tiahe Butler, with production management by Rachel LaRue and series production by Jane Yee.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Talofa Lover. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.